This is a very exciting topic. I know everybody is really interested in cybersecurity. It's getting a lot of press. It's really dominating the headlines lately. And so I'm really excited for this panel today. I like to start off with just sharing a couple stats in the cybersecurity world just to set context for this audience, right? And so cybersecurity attacks have increased 72% from 2021 to 2023. And that's because we have so much more data out there. So, IoT devices, 16 billion IoT devices, 5 billion internet users, and that's generating 291 zettabytes of data. That's a massive amount of infrastructure and devices to secure, and that's causing a lot of damage that is possible out there, right? So 4.5 million is the cost of an average breach, as well as 277 days to contain. And so I know that's a very dark and gloom setting, but I think what's really exciting is that there's a lot of technology out there that is helping protect our enterprise. And so with that, I'm really excited to talk to our panelists today and get into kind of not only the adoption out there, what are the potential and challenges that AI really brings to the cybersecurity landscape. So first, I'd love to just allow our panelists to introduce themselves. I know Nicola did state your titles, but if there's anything else you'd like to share with this audience to set the context as to your perspective.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm Matt Craning. I'm currently the CTO at Cortex in Palo Alto Networks, which is kind of the all things AI and data division. Formerly, I was the co-founder and chief technology officer of Expanse, which created the attack surface management category, where every 5 minutes we identify every single system on the internet, figure out if it's vulnerable and who owns it. So a friend of mine described this as monetizing IT mistakes at planetary scale. And then we sold to Palo Alto Networks in 2020. So very excited to be here and share our perspectives on AI.
Thank you, Matt. Tanisha?
Nice to see everyone. Hopefully you all are awake and had your coffee. We'll try to make sure that this is an interesting conversation. But Tanisha Gordon, I lead our data and digital trust solution offering within our cyber market offering at Deloitte. And what that means is that I do everything related to data privacy, data protection, data security, but also online digital trust and protection. So think of things like content moderation compliance, privacy engineering, safety engineering, things of that nature. So super excited to be here, and AI falls within that bucket as well, especially around AI governance and explainability.
Great, thank you. And Jan?
Thanks, Chow. So Yan Zai, I'm a senior director in Visa, and I lead the cyber analytics and AI innovations function inside the Visa Cyber. And it's really great to be here to have this opportunity to discuss and exchange some ideas about the AI and cyber.
Thank you so much. So Matt, I know at Palo Alto's, there's a lot of integrating of AI into a lot of security products. I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So we've been using machine learning for over 15 years now, but I think the main advancements and a big reason why we're here is talking about Gen AI in particular. And kind of our opinion is that Gen AI offers two great ways to improve overall security. The first is actually using Gen AI to defend against Gen AI. And there are many powerful models in the wild being used to do a lot of nefarious things. And a constant theme of security is to think like an attacker. So a lot of this has been using Gen AI systems to both predict how Gen AI will be used by malicious researchers and get ahead of that. And that's both understanding techniques as well as actually understanding what novel data can we generate and then put into our very, very large, more traditional machine learning systems to kind of understand that novelty before it's actually been created. The second is then new novel experiences. So, as you mentioned early, there's a huge amount of data in cybersecurity, and it's some of the most unintuitive things around for almost everybody, even people that work in security, as I'm sure we're all aware. So how do we create experiences that allow people to access, understand, summarize, and interact with cybersecurity data and cybersecurity products in much more natural ways. So I'm sure we'll all talk about this stuff later, but this has a number of back-end components, but it also has a number of front-end components, especially around copilots for interactions and taking what is a very high volume, very awkward, the most unnatural data set ever assembled, and making it understandable so that machines can do what they're best at and human analysts can do what they're best at.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of adoption of copilots. I think it's so natural for everybody to really think about, right? But what are you seeing in terms of some of the limitations in adoption there? Because I'm sure, yeah, products, that's product life cycle, right? That you have these customer feedback.
Well, I think I think like everyone else, excuse me, the things our products do are very important for extremely large enterprises. You can't have a hallucination in that then takes down a company. So I think top of mind for me right now, and honestly a more benign setting, is something like what happened to Canada Airlines, where their chatbot / copilot actually made up a refund policy, and then it had to be honored. So I'm sure for all of us with businesses that face either that do business with the consumers or other businesses, you definitely don't want a made up refund policy having to be honored. But that's actually a pretty benign interaction when you can think of all the ways that a slight error can go wrong with copilots. So a lot of our experiences are saying we want to use a lot of the creativity and have that be in bounded ways to understand things like intent. We also want to make sure that there is very good human controls, that there's a human operator set so that a machine is not automatically pulling levers kind of at random or would even have the ability to do so.
Yeah, that human in the loop. Yeah. I have a question for Tanisha. I know that we've been working with Deloitte for a while now, and especially in the area of cybersecurity, accelerating a lot of our threat detection. And I would love to hear a little bit about maybe some of the ways in which you're, beyond this offering, I guess, like how are you helping with clients in terms of generative AI and UC adoption?
So the way that we're organized within Deloitte from a cyber perspective, we have several solutions. In cyber, we don't say cybersecurity, we say cyber holistically because it cuts across a bunch of different dimensions. So we have application security, we have data and digital trust, the team that I help to lead. Then we have infrastructure and cloud, we have cyber strategy, product security, application security, detect and respond. And that's how we have organized around helping our clients deal with some of the toughest cyber issues. And then within that, what we've done recently is actually transmute these solutions into a platform-driven service and embed AI to make it more intelligent and applying a series of automated workflows. And what that's helping our clients to do is to decrease some of their costs as well as their technological complexity around having disparate tools, because it's tool agnostic. It integrates several different tools in order for you to be able to predict threats, minimize threat fatigue, things of that nature. So that's how we are largely organized. But when we're thinking about AI and just generative AI and a lot of the conversations that are happening today, we see it from three paradigms. So one is defend. How do we help our client anticipate, respond, and defend against threats that are driven by generative AI or AI, but also minimize the attack surface as well as vulnerabilities. The second component is really around protect. So again, we know with generative AI, it poses a lot of opportunities from a monetary perspective, operational perspective, and insights perspective. So what we do is we help our clients as they're building new product features, platforms, systems, AI agent, make sure that those things are being developed and launched securely, but also safely from like just a content moderation perspective, especially with generative AI, but also making sure that it's compliant. We see the AI Act in Europe just went into effect, and the executive order, there are tons of regulations coming up. So that's the second component. So it's defend, protect. And then the third paradigm by which we are embracing this whole AI movement is really around transform, which I think speaks to the title of today's panel. And it's all around how do you transform your cyber operations and your trust and safety operations to drive operational efficiency, effectiveness, and just become more intelligent and have a resilient posture as it relates to attacks, threats, but also just bad behavior and misuse of systems and platforms.
That's really interesting. I feel like in that cycle, although it's a common cycle, is probably dramatically accelerated now, right? I mean, I think that as we were talking about the cat and mouse game earlier, like the amount of time that you're going to have to kind of reinvent yourself and transform is probably much accelerated. I brought Jan on this panel here today because I really wanted to hear the customer perspective, right? As we're building technologies, as we're helping clients, how is the customer seeing Gen AI really impact cybersecurity? I know you're thinking about long-term envision for Visa. What are some of the challenges that you see? But also, please bring in the benefits as well.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the AI strategy with cybersecurity, I think the key takeaway should be proactive. So for cybersecurity, it'd be nice that if like Palo Alto Networks, Matt will be able to generate this wonderful tools and we just use it, right? But you have to see that cybersecurity need to be engaging AI from the get-go, right? Because it's not just we utilize AI to boost up our productivity, to improve the mean time to react, mean time to detect, to expand the detection bandwidth. This also has to do with the inherent risk with AI because this wave is unlike anyone, right? Any past technology wave before. Everyone's jumping on this, excuse the word, bandwagon, right? So it's because everyone knows that there's going to be milk and honey down the road, and there are also wolves and bears behind you, and who's going to be slowest, going to be tear up and eaten raw, right? So cyber is not going to be the only team that are moving this. All the business teams, they're going to be jumping on this very quickly. The client services, the sales, the marketing, the creative, the products. And this round of generative AI is really unlocking people's innovation, right? And from Visa side, we try and say like 1,000 flowers bloom, and we had this big Gen AI hackathon, over 6,000 participants, over 2,000 prototypes, proof of concepts, and proposals received, right? And that's massive. And as a cybersecurity, you cannot just say, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, and becoming this pullback force. You have to jump in and swim together and understand like everyone's jumping on this, and we don't want to be like a gold rush, 1,000 caravans rushing to the West Coast and getting there. We need to be a few steps ahead of the team and try to build this transcontinental railway system. So everyone, the business, they can jump on this AI train and basically receive all this benefit there. And to do that, really, cybersecurity team need to get engaged from the really get-go and work with closely with your technology partners, your research partners, and the vendor partners. Yeah.
I'm curious as to if you've seen any kind of cost savings or operational savings. Earlier you were mentioning efficiency, but have you found ways in which you've been able to quantify this for Visa in convincing adoption?
So we did some early tests, and there's definitely a great potential with productivity. For example, our incident response team, when they look at leveraging AI agents to deal with certain alerts, they're able to reduce the mean time to respond from over 100 minutes to over less than 100 seconds, right? That is all these proactive actions, containment recommendations, all these threat intelligence search, everything happening simultaneously. So that kind of enhancement is significant, right? You can always measure, say, hey, on a regular basis, we have maybe 500 such alerts within a week, and that's how many man hours we are able to save. But it's really more than that, right? You think about it, because of you have this AI, like by reducing the mean time to detect, the mean time to respond, how much of the security bottom line have you raised up, right? And by being able to respond to additional 100,000 alerts, that 99.9% of them are going to be false positives, and with no feeling of this tired and always diligently digging into all of those. How many potential issues you're able to detect, right? That will change. That kind of change is difficult to just measure with like a cost saving, because at the end of the day, right? Security is measured by how much risk you're able to reduce, you're able to mitigate for the organization, not just how many less people I can hire, how many tools I can get rid of. So I think this is a pretty comprehensive question to discuss about, actually.
I think I know the answer to this for a couple of you guys, but I would like for every panelist here to kind of answer what areas do you think that is the most challenging that you've seen? So for Matt, for you, from people adopting AI products, right? And for Tanisha, clients, what are you seeing that they need the most help with? And then Jan, from like a customer perspective, I remember that you mentioned a couple of areas that, the way that customers are interacting with Visa and your focus area. I thought those were really interesting. But I'll start with you, Matt.
I mean this in the best possible sense. Nobody has any idea what the right AI architecture is or how to set it up securely. And if you do, please talk with me afterwards. Would love to learn from you. But I think it's very similar to cloud transformation, where everything's excited. The cost savings are clear. In this case, I think it's even faster. It used to be, a year ago, you were a leader if you're leaning in. Now I think you're a laggard if you're not, kind of across the globe, which is very impressive. But everyone is under tight timelines. They have a budget. They have all this huge potential in front of them, and there are going to be mistakes that are made. So a lot of things that we're seeing are what is the right way to secure AI? And when you start to scratch on that question, it becomes very, very broad. I think there's a huge focus on models. What we've seen is actually the infrastructure that serves them up is one of the kind of juiciest areas in attack surface. So, as just one example, how permissioned are your AI agents if somebody could actually interact with them arbitrarily, and what could they execute? And there are good techniques for this that you can also apply, but it's applying kind of the traditional set of we need all of these ilities of security, we need all these ilities of trust in a domain where actually about 30% is new. I think 70% is kind of old and existing, best practice needs to be there, but it's getting thrown up and everyone is going to be saying, yeah, this is secure, this checks a compliance box, but an attacker does not care that you have a set of green charts on a PowerPoint deck. They care about if you're actually secure, and that's one of the things we've been both seeing and helping our customers secure immensely. I'm sure Tanisha has a lot on the client side as well there.
Yeah. Before we get to Tanisha, I saw that you have a report out, and I was wondering where we could, maybe the audience could find where Expanse was able to kind of identify kind of very vulnerable areas. Is that published somewhere?
It's depending on the specific report, I think I know the one you're referencing. All of them are downloadable from our website. They're usually co-branded with Unit 42, our threat intelligence service.
Yeah.
So for Expanse in particular, I'd say that we see every single exposed system on the internet in real time for every single company. And for AI in that, on a macroeconomic scale, have we noticed a noticeable 30% uptick in exposed databases? No. Mostly that's because the baseline was so bad to begin with that it's not there. But what we are seeing is that there's a lot more companies going online. There's a lot of cloud access that's there. And the real key is it's not just kind of your core AI application or your core data set. It's every single part of that application, every single part of your infrastructure that can be accessed. And in our experience, it's really easy to secure your core and know what that is because you can kind of look there. There are great sets of tools. It's really hard to secure every single place you're vulnerable. And that's actually one of the areas where we've used AI to help protect against that because you're going to be trying to understand all of the activity across all of your IT teams and all of your now AI teams doing everything. And previously it had been not even trust but verify. It had been, we're going to hope that people are doing it correctly and maybe send us an email 6 months later saying everything is okay, and let's cross our fingers and make some money. That doesn't work today in this threat environment.
So that report will scare you, but hopefully it'll also make you proactive. So 42, unit 42, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, no, +1 to what you said, Matt, and a lot of the work that we're doing around our cybersphere literally is targeted towards like helping to defend and shore up internal operations to defend against abuse with AI. But the use cases that I'm most excited about are really the ones that are transformation. And when I say transformational, it's really around, you know, from a security perspective, how do you help a threat hunter come up with really good threat hunting hypotheses that are like relevant, probable, and actually testable, and being able to do that quickly. From a detect and response, as well as from just a monitoring and pattern analysis perspective, using generative AI not only to sift through that data and drive insights faster, real time, but also to predict threats. And you know, we also work within the area of privacy. And I know we're always thinking like Gen AI is just only on the cybersecurity side, but from a privacy perspective, think about generative AI's ability to generate synthetic data so that brands and companies don't have to use PII when doing R&D or doing analytics. We're also seeing amazing opportunities to build like a generative AI privacy czar, that's what I'm calling it, where, you know, imagine when you're getting audited by an external auditor because of an FTC compliance order, or when you have requests from regulators. A lot of the brands deal with that. And what they do when they get these requests in, it comes in through legal, they scramble and try to respond. But imagine if you train your agent on every single litigation you had in court, every internal signal, every control, every policy, everything on your roadmap, every incident that has happened. And when these requests and questions come in from regulators as well as auditors, you can go ask that agent and they can give you the information, but they can also predict what the auditor might ask in the future based off previous questions or inquiries or what's happening outside in terms of like external events, if the regulator in a certain country is like enforcing a lot. And even produce documentation. I work a lot in the tech sector and no one likes to document their controls and processes, but imagine you can use generative AI to generate, you know, controlled documentation that we know will pass an audit. I think those are the potentials from a privacy perspective. And then even in the area of trust and safety, which is where we play as well, within the cyber area within my firm, I'm seeing clients, it usually takes about 6 to 12 months to develop and train a classifier. And a classifier is basically a piece of technology that identifies bad behavior or abusive content. So think about disinformation, misinformation. We have elections coming up. Classifiers are able to detect those, and then there are enforcement systems that pull them down. It usually takes a typical company 6 to 12 months to build those things. It's taking 2 to 3 days now with Gen AI. These are the biggest companies that are now able to spit out more sophisticated classifiers because of Gen AI. And then when we're thinking about enforcement, I know some of you on social media, you're like, why did they say that this is sensitive content? Or why did they pull this down? That's because you have these machine learning algorithms that's doing it, but it's not as intelligent. But with new advanced AI, specifically Gen AI, you can fine tune these enforcement systems real time versus you having to submit something saying, I think you took this content down erroneously. Like you could literally build AI systems that's able to take sentiment off social media as well as just intelligence of complaints and be able to fine tune these enforcement systems real time versus your customers or your users complaining. So those are some of the actual use cases that I'm thinking through with clients that I'm super excited about because it helps you to establish a secure, safer interaction model with customers and users, and is really driving a lot of cost savings and efficiency.
Yeah, that proactive mindset, I feel like, yeah, you're very privileged to have clients that are trying to think ahead, right? And Gen AI has been able to, I mean, we're experimenting with like, you know, is there such a thing as like a cyber GPT, right? Is there cyber data that's unique for cyber, you know? Is that a language that we can train a model on? But if, you know, if it works out, then I think that proactive approach is really beneficial. Jan, for you, what are some challenges that you're focused on for Visa?
So for me, like for us in Visa, not only we want to look at leveraging AI to protect the enterprise, but also how we secure the AI itself. And with generative AI, they raise additional complications on the supply chain, right? The model supply chain. Elon Musk just open sourced a new model, right? Do we trust him enough not going to do any interesting social experiment within that? There's a big black box nature with these models, right? And what if, a couple months later, a foreign company open source a large language model? What if a foreign university open source a specialized language model for cybersecurity? How are you going to test, evaluate, assess these kind of models? And all the fine-tuning, right? Who's going to be fine-tuning this? How they're going to fine-tune this? How frequently are they going to fine-tune this? It looks like there's a lifecycle management that we also need to have visibility and manage. And also agree with Matt, right? It's a trust but verify. And this verification is tedious a lot of time. And, but now with AI, right, imagine what's happening in my organization, right? The site reliability team, engineering team, they're building their AI agent to look at this health of the services. Application teams will be building their agents, right? And what if cybersecurity side of agent, they will be able to communicate in real time to these other agents, right? This is distributed intelligence. This like a neural cells, embedded in every single arm and leg and body in this organization's IT environment, right? So then that will make cybersecurity's job a lot easier, right? Trust but verify. I will be able to go through this without a awkward phone call or a awkward instant message, right? Mm-hmm. And all of this happening behind the scene. I think that will be something really interesting to look into. And of course, like with regard to privacy, legal, and there's a lot of implications over there, right? And so from cybersecurity point of view, because we are also involved in building the enterprise generative AI service, there's an additional issue popping up. It's like when all of a sudden with generative AI, people are expecting to be able to consume enterprise knowledge much more effectively, much more efficiently. And you have a lot of competing knowledge inside the enterprise. Some knowledge are more important than others. Some knowledge are more up to date than others. This whole enterprise knowledge management, keeping things true and making things efficient, that to us is a big challenge. And we have to also leverage generative AI to basically push out this the content classification, inspection, to the point that the content is being generated. Do all the classification, categorization, update, labeling, tagging, and that I think that's and make sure that there's no pollution in there, right? I think that's really something that raises the bottom line for the productivity gain with the generative AI for organization. And for Visa specifically, not just Visa, I think any organization, there's also a client service part of things, right? For example, with generative AI, a big challenge is we need to rethink about this facial recognition. Some biometrics will may no longer as sound as it used to be, right? Now it's pretty easy to take a video and to create a 3D modeling of your facial features, 3D print a silicon mask, right? Those things like in the Mission Impossible, right? It's absolutely possible, and I've seen those things in university labs. And how do we deal with this kind of biometrics? And a lot of organizations, they will do this AI-enabled client services, call centers or chat services, right? What if, no, but at the same time, the adversarials will also be able to employ smart agents to do that. Previously, I need to hire a large zombie network to deny service you, right? Pour down gigabyte, terabyte of traffic to your service call center. Now I just need to recruit half a dozen machines and run some 50, 60 smart bots. Eventually get to your reduced call center staff, get every single your human representatives occupied.
Wow.
That's when I can start my social engineering against your customers. When they cannot get adequate response, they're more likely to buy into my traps, right? So these are going to be some immediate threats we need to think about from a cybersecurity point of view.
Yeah.
When you figure it out, you tell us. NVIDIA, we're also struggling with a lot of that internally.
No, I was just going to say plus one to what you were saying, especially around biometrics and what we're seeing with a lot of regulations that are either coming into effect or being considered. Those systems would be considered high-risk systems, and they have to be treated a certain way. They have to have certain controls, tested, audited. So it brings a layer of compliance obligations for those types of systems as well. And even the scenario you brought up really around pretty much deep fakes or creation of using biometrics to create digital copies or digital videos. That's why I think we really need to force the industry to land on a standard whereby we can easily detect whether it's like a general citizen or internet user, or companies can tell when something is deep fake or when something was AI generated. We need standards around that forces these various AI platform service providers to ensure that there's a digital watermark that says anything generated from this system has a digital watermark, so that whenever it's percolating on another platform, it can read it. But you can't do that if we don't have an industry standard that everyone is building upon. Like you said, there's no architecture, no standard architecture either. But that's what's needed to manage some of those risks that you are alluding to.
Yeah, but I think that part is really hard. And right now, I think it's commonly accepted in the academia that there's really no proper counter to deepfake, right? And no, I mean, it's also fun, right? For years, I've been trying to practice social engineering, but obviously my accent is not helpful. But now I can actually pick up a fabulous Southern accent or New York accent and start to test these social engineering calls, right? And that's absolutely interesting. I'm not going to say I'm going to do it, but that's. But look at that's how much you can potentially unlock this the power of adversarials, and that's pretty scary, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword. We'll take questions in a bit. Sorry. I was thinking, as Jan was talking about Visa's experience, I was curious to know if are you seeing clients worried about like deep fakes and all these biometrics things, Tanisha, with Deloitte?
Yes. Yes, I actually anticipated that they would be more concerned given the fact that we have elections in the US and there are dozens of elections in Europe and in Asia. So there is a concern, but because the clients that are most concerned that are digital platform providers, they are also leading in generative AI development. So they are using generative AI to address scaled abuse. So they would consider that scaled abuse, and they are literally building some of the next generation technology that I clearly can't talk about, but that we all need to be aware of to ward against that. So there seemed to not be a huge fear this year, and I thought it should be because of all the elections, but they were preparing from last year and have built a lot of sophisticated technology to do that. But I think from a consumer perspective, we should absolutely be worried, especially for more of our vulnerable population, like our elderly parents, our impressionable kids, because we're seeing a lot of deep fakes from a voice mimicking perspective, back to where you were just alluding to, where it's literally crippling certain families from a financial perspective where, I mean, it's so believable, and I'm in this space and I hear some of these deep fakes and I'm like, this is incredibly convincing. If I get this call, it sounds like my mom, you know what I mean? So I think we need more consumer awareness and figure out how do we protect consumers. And I don't feel like one company or a government can do that. I feel like there needs to be some sort of public-private partnership to do that. And I think the trajectory that we're on in terms of the advancement of technology and AI specifically, I truly believe that maybe every citizen should have their own AI defender that can be your front-facing digital protector that can tell you, oh, that's fake, that's not, and kind of help you sift through things, because reality is going to be questionable later. I think we are ready. Before generative AI, people were like, what is a deep fake? Like, what is fake news? And we were just all living in different realities, and I think it's just going to be so blurred, and I don't know what other method there might be to protect ourselves or keep us sane and aware of what's fact versus, fiction.
Yeah. I wanted to give a couple minutes to the room for questions.
Yes. So let me. So if you're in the audience here, there's a microphone right in the middle if you want to make your way to the microphone if you have a question. And then we also have online questions that are coming in as well, so I can read those off of the card. So
Yeah, I think he had a question.
Yep.
I can vocalize. How far do you think we are from reaching a collective conscious to regulate and control as a community? And what steps do you think we need to take, and what entities need to be involved?
You want to take that?
Nicola,
first,
you
Matt?
may want to repeat it in case it doesn't pick up for the audience.
I'm sorry, thank you. From a compliance and regulatory standpoint, as a collective whole, as a community, where do you think we need to be, and what steps do you think we need to take to reach proper compliance and regulation to make sure that we're not being frauded and manipulated?
I think that's a very loaded question, but I appreciate it. No, I honestly, I don't think we are anywhere we need to be. I think with this piece of technology, clearly there's a bunch of opportunities from monetization, how you engage users and customers, drive operational efficiency, effectiveness. We talked about the bad actors here, but there's also like not just individual bad actors, but there's also like nation states, and like what does that mean in terms of protecting your critical infrastructure and national security? So when it gets to that level, especially with frontier models, it's very scary. And that's why you're seeing more legislation, more regulations coming out of Europe, the executive order. So we're seeing movement from the government, but you're by your accent, I can tell you're American. Our legislators are not tech savvy, so sometimes they're creating different obligations that could hinder innovation or create downstream harm and impact to society that they're not aware of. So for example, I know one big AI technology company where the European government was telling them, no, I don't want you to use any personal data to train this model. You could release this in region, but you can't use personal data. They're like, well, the model, this AI agent, will not have cultural context. It will not actually be aligned to the values, European values. And then they were like, okay, well, maybe we do need to use that, right? So it's like, that's a benign situation, but we're seeing that disconnect is not helpful. And then on the other side, like just general user awareness, like even the use of generative AI, like I probably shouldn't name client like products, but like ChatGPT or Gemini, there needs to be a user awareness that is a solution that is not supposed to tell me the entire like fact, or it's an interpretive pieces of technology. It's supposed to translate and create something. Literally, there are safeguards and controls in those models that are anti-regurgitative, meaning it's not supposed to regurgitate or copy information. So if that's what we're dealing with, why would you expect the output to be a reflection of society or a reflection of history? So like, you wouldn't have that's not like searching for something on Google search, right? So just like shifting and make sure like users are aware, business users, and even business users, they're like, okay, I'm getting this Copilot or some sort of generative AI for my workforce, and they will believe that the service provider should be covering everything from a security perspective. No, like just like cloud where there's a shared responsibility model, there's a shared responsibility model when it comes to AI, but that awareness is not there from an enterprise perspective. So I say that to say from a government, politics, business user, it's all over the place, and we do need to like come together to have a cohesive, path forward.
I guess I would add, if there's a place where a choke point exists that's economic, you can have it. If not, it just won't happen. Like, there could very well be a shooting war with China this decade. As soon as that happens, no one cares about AI safeguards for autonomy. They just don't. So I think when you get to commercial and kind of lower stakes but still important things, and you're controlled within largely like a country and a nation state, you can get some things, but even there you need an enforcement mechanism. If it's kind of at the level of a few people with a GPU or a nation state, there isn't any. And we're kind of uncomfortable and not used to that, especially for the last 30 years, especially with Pax Americana, but that's the future.
Do we have time for questions online or anything?
So I think that right now the regulation is mostly focusing on the producers of the AI models, right? They're regulating how you develop a secure AI model, what kind of safe guardrails you need to put in there. But I think there's also this democratized AI, and like every normal people will have that adversarial, so we'll also have access to those things. And so I'm not as optimistic as some other panelists. I think that it's just gonna, people will start to learn about, we need to just be, there are gonna be hard lessons than to tell the whole, educate the whole population to learn, have a new concept about your privacy, about the sharing and how you want to basically have a capability to tag things, to verify things. There's going to need a lot of innovations, like the personal, how do you, verify things personally, right? Maybe we all should carry a digital key fob, and receive a call from my mom. I press a button, and she press a button and say yes, and I know it's not deepfake. But in terms of fraud, I think the technology is just going to be everywhere for the adversarials.
So there were several questions that came in online about ethics in generative AI, and I think they centered around two topics. One is use of the data, and then the second question was around generative AI being used by adversaries as well as in defense. And so I think we covered some of that, but if you guys want to speak a little bit more about that topic.
If anyone wants to take that, I can, and then I want to allow some time for closing, so this will be the last question. Is anybody interested in taking AI?
I guess I'll speak to the adversary one.
And that's
I don't know exactly what the question was, other than kind of opining on this topic a little bit myself. But I think for most of this, I talked earlier about choke points, and I think in the West you can get some kind of regulations around a certain kind of scale. It's very hard to get however many thousands of H100s and now all the new next-gen chips in a place with economic activity that's not regulated or otherwise kind of subject to laws. But when you look at democratized models, it's open source. People can do anything, and the regulation enforcement would have to be putting something on everyone's computer, which I don't think is going to happen. It gets to a lot of very creepy situations. So from an adversarial point of view, I think the reason I'm optimistic is the defenders have way more data. So that's one of the nice things of being a company that makes shields, is that we have over, well over 6 petabytes a day of data that our customers are giving us, over 100,000 customers. We can really track adversary patterns very, very well. And traditionally, the issue had been from kind of, again, a battle of wills in cybersecurity, that it was really hard to defend everywhere at once. I think that's one of the things that actually AI can actually enable us to do, and kind of invert a lot of issues, which was all of a sudden if an attacker makes a mistake anywhere, their TTP is identified globally and completely useless forever forward, and inoculates the entire ecosystem. And I'll say we've seen, especially with a lot of great nation-state campaigns over the last decade, and including the last years, the vendor community, even though we compete for customers, we really do share behind the scenes to actually protect our customers. And this is true both in vendors, it's also true in businesses as well, as I'm sure John can attest, where he's probably talking regularly with his operational partners at direct competitors otherwise, because the industry has come together and realized this should not be an area where we have competitive differentiation, we should all actually fight together because we're in this fight together.
Yeah, and just from the ethical piece, there's so much to say there, but when I looked at a few regulations and even some of the standards, NIST AI framework, there's also a Singapore AI governance framework. I think the UK came out with one as well, but they have like almost over 100 controls in there. But there are controls around like anti-discrimination, especially, you know, codified from a financial perspective, like access to services. So we see some of that being codified in regulations as well as in industry standards. But when it comes to like bias, that side of the ethical paradigm, and I'm assuming this person that wrote that question was kind of speaking to some of the bias, AI newsworthy issue that happened over the last 2 weeks. I think, you know, in talking with some of my colleagues around AI, of course, AI and bias and like how could you prevent like an incident like that? And in addition to safety reviews and doing red teaming and all of that jazz, making sure you're ready for launch, I do believe that maybe this is something where we put in the control of the user. Like you should be aware of, you know, how diverse this generative AI output would be, and like maybe having some sort of bias paradigm, and maybe you don't want to call it a bias continuum, but something that shows you like, okay, this is a reflection of society, or this is a reflection of like what we believe society should look like from a diversity perspective. Because when you're having these models trained and coded and these systems built, of course, they may reflect the ideals of the institution that's building them and the people that are building them. But I think there may be an opportunity to put the control back in the hands of the users, just like how we put the control of delete my data. What data do you have on me? Like, I want to know how biased is this output? Like, what went behind it? And that's all along the lines of AI explainability. And I think that should be a feature that's exposed to users.
That's really interesting.
Thank you so much, you guys. So we are down to our last 17 seconds in the room. So I'm getting all the signals. But I wanted to thank these speakers. This obviously content was fantastic, and everybody's super interested. So Tanisha, Jan, Matt, Chow, thank you so much for all of your time today. And thank you guys for joining us. Have a great GTC.